Welcome to the room where the talkers are all from the future 52nd state, i.e. the United Kingdom. Most of you have met me, I'm Bob from the UK, and for those of you that weren't in Shirley's talk yesterday, I just want to introduce our speakers today. So, as you can...
Sorry, the camera.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I didn't know I was on camera, I'd have put my makeup on. So, Shirley is a professor of haematology in London, but I don't want to give you all that boring stuff about. I want to tell you a little bit about Shirley, a human being who 2 years ago rode with me from London to Paris to raise awareness and funds for WM. She's also a lady that's given up countless time of her own time to do webinars with me and podcasts and that kind of stuff. And in particular, one when she was joining me for an important webinar on peripheral neuropathy, and she was in her car outside of the vets because the family cat was ill and had to go to the vets, but she still, whilst driving along back from the vets with the cat in the car, still did the webinar, even though she was driving along. So that's the kind of lady she is, and more recently she came to Dublin to help me out with my Irish support group. And we shared a few pints of Guinness after that. And also speaking today is Andrea. Andrea is, I'll tell you exactly what she is. Andrea Preston is a pharmacist consultant and head of patient innovation and care at Sanius Health. She's passionate about research for patient benefit. She's an NHS, National Health Service England, clinical entrepreneur. And she's a member of the British Oncology Pharmacy Association Committee and UK Myeloma Research Alliance. Her areas of interest include optimising medication adherence, dosing of systemic anti-cancer therapy in obesity, and the use of innovative technologies to improve patient outcomes. And she's recently co-created a smartphone application for patients living with CML, receiving a highly commended award as Tech Innovator of the Year at the Innovation Awards UK 2022. So I'll hand you over to Shirley and Andrea.
Thanks very much, Bob. So while Andrea is a tech innovator, I'm a cat lady. Anyway, so this talk is about quality of life in WM. We've heard a lot about quality of life. Those of you who live with WM feel it every day. It goes up, it goes down. And you might say, well, what's important about it? So there are many ways of measuring quality of life. And I've personally taken a very keen interest in this because in my WM clinic, I hear many stories of patients who some feel brilliant and well, others feel less so, some are on therapy, some are not. And so I try and want to make sense of how to help people with their condition. And that could include starting treatment in some, or in others, not doing it straight away, but also monitoring treatment and how do we do that, especially when people are on long-term continuous therapies, such as BTK inhibitors. So the overview is to provide, to first of all talk about wellness. It has many layers, many dimensions. There's physical, emotional, social, and spiritual well-being. This is different for each individual. And then, of course, WM can impact on that by causing fatigue and even inherently a risk of infection because of the way the disease behaves. It emanates from the immune system. But then when we treat, it can also cause further problems with infection. You then get onto different medications. They can impact you and how you feel. There's all kinds of other effects on thinking, cognitive function. There's famous chemo brain for those who've been on treatment, and it doesn't just have to be chemo. There's also the emotional toll of having a chronic illness with a cancer diagnosis. And so what we'd like to do is turn wellness into a proactive activity, not just be on the receiving end of trying to be well, chasing a a sort of feeling of wellness, but be in control, in charge of it. And an important way to achieve that is to actually track well-being and quality of life and measure it. And this has been a thorny issue in many diseases and continues to be. But it's also particularly difficult in WM because it's a rare disease. It's got so many talents, as Maury Gertz explained yesterday, and Shana. Everyone's talked about the various things you can experience with WM. But it's a very important endpoint in clinical trials. So whilst we as doctors want people to feel well, when we set up new trials, when we want to give new therapies or we want companies to work on new therapies, we have to have endpoints in terms of, what does this new drug do for patients? Does it make them feel better? Because if you have a drug that cures the disease or gets rid of it or reduces it, but people feel really lousy all the time, you really have to question whether that's the right way forward. So traditionally, trials, and they still do actually, they focus on very statistical outcome measures like overall response rate, progression-free survival, overall survival. And these are very important measures because we want to see how effective drugs are. But we also need to look at safety. But because we have more and more treatments that actually help people live a very long time, we need to understand more about the effect of the chronic illness on those individuals. So defining quality of life, there are many tools, and they've been drawn up by different groups, such as the EORTC, which is the European Oncology Group. There's Euroqual, there's FACIT, which is the American Quality of Life Organization. And they try to measure different things like physical functioning, psychological status, how you function in society and your function in work and so on, as well as symptoms and side effects. And there are a number, I've put a few down at the bottom, which are very widely used, EORTC, QLQ, there's FACG, there's tons of them. And each of them are fairly didactic questionnaires, which you fill out. You can do it online nowadays, but it's definitely part of trials. And I think anyone who's been in a trial probably will have filled some of these out. The question is, the problem is that quality of life can be very subjective. If you're in a trial, you go to your trial visit, you're given a questionnaire, you fill it out. On that day, you may have just had a bad day. You may have been stuck in traffic. I don't know, anything could have happened. So at the time, you're meant to report as you are on the day. If you're not feeling great, you report that. Now, that doesn't necessarily give the trialist an overview of how the treatment is actually working in you. On the other hand, you may feel great on the day of your visit, but a lot of the time outside of that, you may not feel well at all. So these sort of snapshots are problematic for statistical analysis, number one. Secondly, there's often missing data. So it's nice to collect quality of life information on everyone, but people may not be able to do it for whatever reason. You also have to choose the right PRO tool, patient-reported outcome tool, because that is critical for relevance in that disease and also how you interpret it. The other thing is how do you interpret changes? There are scores where you can say, look, this is better, this is worse. But it's very kind of clunky. It's also important to note that quality of life is essential to report in the development of new drugs. So both the FDA and EMA recognize patient-related outcomes as valid measures. They want them to be properly validated. They want them to be systematically collected. And in fact, at the point of drug trial development, you have to declare how you're going to measure quality of life. So these things are, they are becoming enshrined, actually, in law, if you like, in the phase of development of trials. So in early phase trials, quality of life is not as much a focus because it's about how effective is the drug. Does it work? Is it safe? As you go through higher phases, like phase 3 trials, some of you may have been on the ASPEN study, which compared ibrutinib to zanubrutinib. Their quality of life endpoints become much more important because you're comparing two drugs and you need to report whether one is better than the other. And in fact, that was exactly what happened in ASPEN. The response rates of zanubrutinib were a little bit better than ibrutinib. But what stood out was that Zanu was better tolerated. Some of the side effects were less. And this is what has moved the field towards zanubrutinib being the BTKI of choice in WM as opposed to ibrutinib. And that has influenced payers and people who fund medical treatments as to what they approve and put on the pharmacy list. So the question is, are these quality of life instruments that are currently used, are they useful? Do they work in WM? And the answer is that, well, many of them have been validated for broader populations of cancer patients, and even lymphoma-related ones. But as we heard, WM is a very unique disease, and every patient is unique within that. So things like IgM effect, neuropathy, autoimmune phenomena, these don't really come up in standard questionnaires because they're not a big issue in most lymphomas. So we need a tailored tool for quality of life measurement. And some of us have actually reviewed quality of life tools in WM and have demonstrated that they're not fit for purpose. So a systematic literature review showed that actually it doesn't tell the full story. There is the Australian registry, the patient-derived registry, where people put their own data. Now, these things are really helpful and useful because it adds to the picture overall. And then, I mentioned before, the Aspen trial showed features that helped payers to decide which drug should be approved. So how do we move forward? Well, there are new methodologies, and that's where, the employment of digital health tools comes in. We all hear about AI and digital this, and that, and the other, and whether we like it or not, it is here. We have it in our smartphones. We have, it's all happening. So I think when I met the team at Sanius, who've been doing a lot of work in sickle cell disease already and other diseases, it struck me very much that we need to try and capture quality of life in WM patients using these methods. And I'd seen some of their presentations at ASH and other conferences, and I was incredibly impressed, and I wanted to be part of that. So we can use a patient-centric trial design, in other words, patients' input to the measures that we use. We can individualize quality of life metrics. And actually, the important thing with wearable tech, for example, is that it measures things in the background. So it captures experience all the time, not just at a snapshot. And that is then fed into a database, an ecosystem, which then uses clever methods, including machine learning, to work out, what it all means and how to actually predict problems, perhaps, that may arise in the future. So this is where I kind of move towards I'll just basically introduce my connections with Sanius Health, but I've asked and Andrea to join because she can give you a bit more information about the actual application and how we might hopefully be able to set it up in WM, if indeed that is what WM patients are interested in. So we have collected a range of data using smartwatches, which Andrea will show you more about. The kind of things that are picked up are ECG, oxygen saturations, sleep and activity tracking. It can detect things like cardiac arrhythmias, and Bob can testify to that. It's actually, depending on the tech that you use, the watches, you can have a watch that is very user-friendly. You don't really have to do much, but it also has a long battery life. A lot has been put into this. Temperature is important in WM, and this is something we want to include, and that has been included. So there's a lot of measuring variables that can be picked up. So we capture activity, sleep, heart rates, and then the data is fed into a digital ecosystem through an app on your phone, which is then collected, and we can then analyze data for presentation. We also include some of the existing quality of life questionnaires because that's what's validated at the moment, but we hope then to show that actually when you add wearable tech and devices to this process, we can enhance it considerably. And here's a snapshot of results, which shows that, in the WM cohort, there were, how many patients were there? I can't quite remember, actually. I don't have that down here, but the median age was 67, half were female. We got ideas, we got information about whether they were on treatment, what treatments they were on, whether they were on clinical trials. There was medications on there, which is really important to know because of interactions. And of course, there are gaps, but that is something that's been greatly improved on since the launch. There was also completion of patient-related outcomes on electronic systems. And this is then synced and, in fact, compared with clinical data on the medical record, so we can correlate what is actually happening. And here is a really complicated picture, which actually looks like a gene expression profile, which probably Zach Hunter showed you. It's not meant to be read, but you can see the number of variables that are measured and how they correlate with different aspects. And Andrea will talk a bit more about this. So, I think it's really exciting, I think, for people to be more engaged with measuring their own quality of life, having their own actual readouts as well on their phone, on their app, on their watch, on their phone. They can then discuss this with their clinicians. But meanwhile, the data is being collected for the researching team so that they can analyze and present this and collect these data so that we can work with pharmaceutical companies as they develop their medicines, and we can also work with funding bodies so that we can get the medicines approved jointly. It's always a joint process. And this is just a snapshot of, you can't read it at all, but it was last year's ASH meeting where we presented that it's feasible to do this work in the WM population. There's a lot of readouts, and we would love to gauge whether you as a community in the US are interested in going down this route. And if so, then we'd like to take it forward, probably via an application to the IWMF for some funding. But what I'll do now is hand over to Andrea, who's already been introduced. So I won't introduce her again, but over to you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Shirley. It's such a privilege to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I had a brilliant time yesterday and got to meet some of you last night on the dance floor, which is good fun. So just to kind of, Shirley's done a great job there of kind of giving a bit of background. So I just want to take you through the programme in a bit more detail of what we've done with WM patients in the UK, and give you a bit of background as well on Sania's health. So it was initially set up, our founder and CEO was actually diagnosed with a rare hematological condition himself in his 30s. And he said to his consultant at the time, what can I do to help accelerate research and improve patient outcomes for patients with this condition that I've got? And his consultant said, well, I know what's happening with you in clinic and then in clinic in 3 months' time, like all my other patients, but I'm not capturing what's happening in between. And it literally started off with him being kind of patient zero, entering his data into an Excel spreadsheet, bringing in biometric data that he was capturing from different devices, and sharing that with his clinician. And they worked out that they could really kind of track predictors of adverse effects of the disease that he had. And it's now grown that we've now got over 1,000 patients on these different with these different hematological conditions using the app with a wearable. So just to run through them, they're just along the bottom there, but we've got a platform in sickle cell disease, multiple myeloma, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, MPN, which is, these are all really long words, myeloproliferative neoplasms, and chronic myeloid leukemia. And these are all, now conditions that, we live with for a long time. They're chronic, so it's really important to kind of capture that day-to-day experience and really show what it's like living with these conditions as well, and give a platform to show, like Shirley said, the clinical community and companies who develop drugs, what it's like living with this condition and what's important to patients. So it really gives an opportunity to empower patients with everything in one place, so they can look at their symptom tracking, what's happening with the wearable in terms of sleep quality, physical activity, which are can be indicators of quality of life too, which we'd love to work with Shirley on more in the future around getting different metrics. So before I carry on, I just want to just a show of hands of how many people do use apps, just to see. I think that's high. And then who wears a wearable device at all? Or looks, wow, amazing. So a really tech-enabled audience then. So for each condition we're in, what we're really passionate about is working with key clinicians in that disease area to make sure we're answering questions that the clinical community find important, and that can be, translated then into research and outcomes that help with pharma, either with maybe HTA appraisals, so health technology appraisals we call them in the UK, where they submit to bodies who look to whether they're going to fund the drug or not. So, and obviously you're not able to read these, but these are just some examples of the research that we've published in these other conditions at international conferences. So, helping to then network with other clinicians and just really show what the kind of burden can be of living with these diseases. Because obviously in the clinical trials, patients are entered via selected criteria, which may not be the case in the real world. So getting this real world evidence is really vital. So these are just some examples from the European Hematology Association conference last year. From ASH, we had an oral at ASH last year and the year before, talking about our work in sickle cell disease, where that's our kind of most mature database. And we've been able to do some machine learning in the background to look at predictors for vaso-occlusive crisis, which is the adverse event that patients with sickle cell disease can have, which can be really painful, can actually really have a massive impact on their quality of life because the patients get admitted to hospital. They can be young patients who have issues then with, lots of childcare issues, etc., etc. So, giving patients a tool that can help to predict when that can happen and learn what might prevent that has been, really beneficial. Some patients said they thought going to the gym too hard was a reason they got a vaso-occlusive crisis, but actually it transpired that it was being dehydrated. So just having this information really helps to kind of, make behaviour changes really to help manage the condition. So I'll just talk a bit more about the WM and Me app now. So Shirley's covered this a little bit already, but I'll just go through some of the key features in detail. So where the lovely lady is in the middle, if you click on that, it takes you to a notice board, which has really all the good information sources in one place to help patients with education. So and we have NHS links to eating well, sleeping well, medical well-being, etc. And also we will be building on that and working with the WM community. But for example, one thing I think is really important is about drug interactions as a pharmacist. And we heard yesterday about turmeric and pomegranate powder. And, these are really crucial questions that patients may have. And sometimes you can't always get hold of your healthcare professional, particularly in the UK. We have a challenge with capacity and resource. So making sure there's a really good, credible reference source available for patients to look at is really vital for us. So that notice board has lots of really key links. There's a chat function in this one here. Will then take you to our patient support team who can answer any questions you've got. They are really vital and they build really lovely relationships with our patients. They end up finding out if they've had a breakdown in a relationship, if the cat has died, lots of, they really get a good rapport with the patients to also help. It started off with tech queries, but, has really grown from that, helping to encourage patients to reach out to a healthcare provider if needed, etc. The wearable device that we use in the UK is this one here. It's the Withings Scan Watch, which myself and Bob are proudly modelling today. And I think a few people asked me last night on the dance floor about it as well, when my heart rate was a lot higher last night on there. But, really good it looks like a normal watch, so that we found that patients wear it a lot more then. And Bob, I don't know if you want to add in anything here, but We've tried and tested all the different devices, like Garmin, Apple, etc. What's so good about this one as well is that it's got a long battery life. It's 30 days, so you don't have to think about taking your charger if you're going away. So that's been really crucial in helping us collect this really, valuable information. It picks up AFib, like Shirley said, which has been really key for patients. And Bob actually has had an experience where actually didn't feel any symptoms, but the watch detected an AFib. Obviously really important in the era of the BTK inhibitors. And now Bob has been referred on to get extra testing with a cardiologist. So this was just happening in the background, and we have similar stories in some of our other conditions as well, particularly with temperature. In myeloma, we've had patients then present to hospital and actually have neutropenic sepsis that's picked up earlier. So it's about picking up adverse events earlier as well. The other screen just shows, it gives a chart of the last 7 days entry, so you can track and monitor your condition as you go too. And all of this can be shared with your healthcare provider, so you can export the data via a CSV file, which can be emailed or WhatsApped, however you communicate with your healthcare provider. Just really helping them fill the gaps. And also when I see patients in clinic, a lot of them will only remember the last week or two, and often it's the partner who's then saying, no, that is not true. You know, if you say, how have you been doing? They'll say really well, and then the partner will say, actually, you were an absolute nightmare 2 months ago. You know, so it's really helpful to try and just fill those the information gaps. You can also enter symptoms and feelings as well in a diary format, which can be really valuable also. So I've just got some of the symptom monitoring screens to show you. So it's capturing those really important symptoms that the clinicians will be looking out for. So night sweats, vomiting, numbness and tingling. And I think, you know, Maury said yesterday about how he really asks his patients how they're doing. And I think being able to track it over time is really important too. We use the EQ5D scoring system within the app just because it's short and sharp. As Shirley said, there's a lot of different tools out there. This is clinically validated, so we make sure we include one within it which can then compare and contrast with trials. But we then will launch other quality of life questionnaires maybe every other month to capture sort of bigger picture information, but this is short and sharp and can also really help with communicating with your healthcare provider. The psychological score as well, we always start at 100, so patients work down, trying to be more positive than starting at 0 and working up. So I'm a pharmacist, so very passionate about medication adherence and optimizing and really giving tools to patients to help them take their medicines. We know in chronic conditions that patients can actually be non-adherent in up to 50% of patients, and that's across the board. And particularly when I had interviewed patients with a different condition, CML, what I had found that patients who had kind of low-grade side effects like an upset stomach or fatigue, they'd actually planned to take treatment holidays without telling their clinician. Say they had a party on the weekend or were going on holiday, they would stop their treatment for a few days before but not tell their clinician this. And what I wanted to do is really improve how they communicate on that, because we know it's really important with the type of treatment in CML to take it every day. So what would be better is that if they are having these kind of low-grade effects that the clinicians often aren't asking about, that we work with the patient maybe to reduce the dose or do it in a tailored manner, just, you know, really to help keep that adherence to treatment up. So there's a medication reminder feature we have within the apps where you can add how many times a day you take it and have a reminder set. So particularly helpful for some patients, not for everybody. Some may not want a reminder coming up on their phone every day, and you may have other methods of doing it, but another kind of great way. And it can then produce adherence charts, so you can see how you're doing, and also share that with your healthcare provider too. And for us, this is really important feature alongside looking at symptoms and to see, you know, are the treatments causing any symptoms? Is there a match there in timings, etc.? And this is just to show that our patient support team are there also to help bring all of this information together. So there's the information from the app that you'll be entering, which they'll help support you with. If patients don't enter for a while, the patient support team will reach out proactively and just check in, make sure everything's okay. As I said, they do get good relationships with patients. They're there to answer any questions, particularly when patients first start on this, you know, with syncing the device with the app, etc. So yeah, they're a great team who you know, really engage with patients to make sure you're getting the most out of the you know, the technology. And sort of this slide just kind of summarizes really the three kind of areas that we use in terms of getting this kind of really patient-focused approach to getting results. So we've got the digital patient wallet, which is what we call it in the app, where you report your patient-reported outcomes. There's the remote monitoring via the wearable device. And just to emphasize again, this captures physical activity, sleep quality, ECG, oxygen rates, respiratory rates, temperature. And David Kahn said yesterday about how we're all snowflakes, and I think this is really important in terms of bringing all that information together. Oh, sorry, that we're not, you know, just looking at, you know, 5 questions, for example. It's really bringing in lots and lots of information together. And then what we do with some of our programs is we make sure we reward patients for entering their data. So there are schemes whereby we and we adapt them according to the condition as well. So for our sickle cell patients, we sometimes give Uber vouchers or Deliveroo vouchers because they can really struggle with admissions to hospital. And then for other conditions, we might use an Amazon voucher. So we tailor it accordingly in some of our programs because we realize it is, you know, it's an effort on your part as well to be entering this information if we're using it in a study. So how it works is that the patients will register their interest by downloading the app or putting it on the microsite. You can enter your information. And then basically one of our patient support team reach out to you and really guide you through the consenting process and to how to use the app. You can't just get access without going through this formal process with our patient support team, because it's really important that we consent you to know how we're storing your data. We have a legal obligation to make sure we show you that we store that data properly, that different people get different access to that information. So the patient support team will obviously see your patient information because they might call you or email you. But the team working in the data analytics side, they only see de-identified data because they do not need to see your name or your contact details. So there's different levels, and we have to, we apply and are regulated by the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK. So we're accredited and have done all our kind of GDPR and due diligence, etc. So that's why we have to take patients through this consent process, so you know how we're storing it. If you wanted to come out of the program, that we would wipe, all your identifiable information instantly. But obviously anything that's gone de-identified into the database can't be retrieved because it's obviously de-identified. So we run through all that sort of thing with patients. If they're on a program then with the wearable device, that will be sent out within 7 days, and our patient support team again will ring up, check they've got it, run them through it. We sometimes do Zoom calls if that's helpful to talk patients through it kind of, on a screen. And then you're set up with, confidently, hopefully then using the app and the biometric data coming in the background, like Shirley said. So these are some example of some patient report extracts. Some patients like to compare perhaps how they're doing with other patients in some of our conditions. So these are just some examples here. I won't go into these in any detail. It's just kind of really to show you how valuable the data can be for patients as well as the researchers. And again, some generated outcomes and wearables data snapshots. So again, I won't go into this in any detail today, but just to give a bit of a flavour, really, and then I can take any questions at the end. So this is an example of some of the work we've been doing in MPN. So we've run this as a study in the UK where patients nationally across the whole of the country can come on board with it. And this is looking at then a correlation, whether there's correlations between quality of life, fatigue, etc., there's different subtypes of MPN, and also between patients who are on different treatments for MPN. So it's really trying to tease out, are there differences? And this is the poster that we've now got, which is due to be presented at EHA, so the European Haematology Association, just in a couple of weeks, actually, in Milan. So yeah, this is just a snapshot of that to show that, you know, it's a novel initial data from the MPN patient smartphone, which is linked to the biometrics. There was a correlation between in MPN there's a specific scoring system called the MPN 10 score, and they were able to show that there was a correlation between that, which could prove to lead us to different endpoints, like Shirley was saying about using different tools in trials rather than just the quality of life tools that we've got now. So this is really exciting work, and coming back to what's really important, and this is about what patients have told us about the app and the wearable, that, you know, it has completely changed how they manage their condition. For some patients, they feel more in control and they can see that real-time data, which makes discussions with their healthcare provider easier and just helps them to navigate, you know, things that may trigger, like I say, in the SCD, it was the vaso-occlusive crisis, but it might be, you know, sleep quality, etc., in other conditions. Some love the app sending them reminders and alerts to stay consistent, and they've noticed real improvement in how they feel every day because they feel more empowered. And again, another one just saying it really makes it easy for them to communicate with their healthcare team. So there's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I hope that's helpful. Bob, I don't know, as a user, if there's anything you would want to add.
So I went to see, just for my routine, you know, WM checkup earlier this year. And when I got there, every day I'd take my ECG, and I'd had a chest infection. And I'd gone into, this told me I was in atrial fibrillation, and I didn't really feel, I had the occasional flutter, but I didn't really take too much. But it kept telling me every day for 2 weeks. And so my appointment came up, and I told my consultant about it. And straight away she said, right, let's do an ECG now. So I went next door, had an ECG. He said, yes, you're in atrial fibrillation. So then I went home with a 24-hour monitor, took that back. And then when I saw her next, she said, right, and by then I'd come out of atrial fibrillation, my chest infection had gone and I was back to normal. I've just sat and done it now, so I'm on normal and I'm at 53, a pulse of 53, although I'm probably at 70 now because I'm a bit nervous up here. But, she said, right, well, let's get you to see a cardiologist. So I'm now in the system with the cardiologist. I'm waiting for a CT scan on my heart. I'm absolutely fine with it, and he says there won't be any problems. But I suppose the point I'm trying to make is this watch got me to that point. Otherwise, first of all, would I have known I was in atrial fibrillation for so long and so frequently? And now, because of this watch, I'll either get put on blood thinners or not, as the case may be. And the other thing is about putting the data in. It literally takes me no more than 3 to 4 minutes every evening, and just go on my app and just answer all the questions. And you can answer them honestly, and sometimes, am I anxious or depressed? Today I'm not, but yesterday I might have been. And you're building a picture up. And I did at one point take a printout. I think you showed a printout there. I printed out and showed it to my doctor. And when you think that, I think both Andrea and Shirley have said this, and somebody said it this morning, I'm on 6 monthly checkups with my doctor now for my WM. So she sees me on that day, and then she sees me 6 months later, and how are you? Yeah, I'm fine, I'm brilliant. And I forget to tell her that 3 months ago I had chest infection or whatever happened. And with that printout, you know, I was able to say, well, there's a printout of my last 6 months, and she was very impressed with it. So I guess it's the way forward, isn't it? Yeah, that's, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was great listening to Paul, you know, in his opening yesterday around data-driven research as well, and just capturing this real-world evidence of, you know, how it is living with the WM on a day-to-day basis, and using, you know, good data to help us take that forward, really. So, and in terms of the app as well, you don't have to be on treatment. You know, it's treatment and not treatment. We're interested in both, because being on active monitoring is also, that's a management plan, you know, that is a treatment as such. So, you know, that can impact on quality of life, of course. So, yeah. So, anyway, I hope that was okay. And any questions would be great. Yeah, so the VOC predictor is a pilot we're doing within the sickle cell disease cohort. So we're looking at what might actually, so it's using the data from the patients, individualized data from the last few days. I'm not a machine learning expert, so I can't tell you any more than it's machine learning, but basically it gives a risk prediction. So it gives a score of what's your risk of a VOC today based on the data that we've been having over the last X number of days. So it gives patients a score out of 10, and then we've been working on improving that. So I think in 2024 it was 78% accurate. So then patients go on to say whether they did have a VOC or not that day. And then in December, when we presented at ASH, it was up in the 90s with the accuracy. So it's an ongoing program. So hopefully we can replicate that with other biomarkers, etc., looking at risks for, with this, there's a lots of immunotherapies and bispecific therapies that are coming out, which have really toxic effects to manage, like cytokine release syndrome, etc. If we can look for, underlying biomarkers that might predict risk, that's really interesting as well. And obviously this machine learning can look at all of that information. And at the moment we launched in the UK only with the wearable device and the app together. So it's amazing to be here to gauge interest of whether, it's something that patients in the US would like to take forward. You can register for the app only. And yes, we would be holding your data in the UK, and we'd obviously go through that with you as well in the consenting process. But what we're looking at then is BYOD, which isn't bring your own drink, it's bring your own device. So what we're looking at, what we could do in the US is look to bring in, so if you have another wearable device that you're using, that we can integrate that data in. But at the moment, that isn't available at the moment. But that's coming very soon, we hope. There's a lot of different kind of APIs and stuff we have to sort with the individual companies. But we're really excited to try and look to gauge appetite, really, if this is something that patients in other countries would be interested in. I don't know if you want to add anything, Shirley, to...
Yeah, I think... there, of course, are very rigorous regulations about data handling and transfer, etc. So we'd love to do this like today, but I think we realize that we need to go through a number of steps. So that one of them is to actually, first of all, gauge interest. And I wonder, show of hands, in theory, is this of interest to anyone in this room? Okay, so, I think... So what we want to do next is to actually, in order to make any progresses, we always have to formulate a little plan, a study, which we want to do looking at subgroups of people with WM who are not on treatment, who are on treatment, who are in follow-up, who maybe have neuropathy, have groups that we can join, we can enroll onto a study within the US, because obviously we want to it's an international organization and we are very much committed to the whole group. So if we have interest, we would want to then apply for funding to get this up and running. Meanwhile, you can get onto the WM&Me app. So the wearable part will follow. So the WM&Me app can happen already.
Yes. Yeah.
But these things do take time to get into process, like any clinical trial, actually, any sort of trial. But I think if there is interest, there is a way to get things moving quite quickly, because we have established protocols and sort of frameworks which we can deploy in the WM setting. The idea, it's so important, I think, to future-proof our practice, because as Andrea mentioned, there are these new treatments called biospecifics coming on board. They will be in WM before long. There are some trials being considered for these things. If we can get ahead of the game, get established, get a whole range of data being uploaded, have a baseline, and then begin to start saying, okay, now this person's on this drug. So it is quite, we're in a stage of planning and wanting to do it, but the WM&Me app you can sign up to already. So that is something you can do. The wearable device is something we need to work through with authorities and the IWMF as well.
it's all free to patients in the UK. Yeah. Yeah, I said our founder is a patient himself, so he's very passionate about this not costing patients. So we raise funds for the wearable devices obviously cost money. So when they're part of studies, we raise money either by getting grant funding, or sometimes pharma companies might come to us with a question. And I mentioned about the HTA, the Health Technology Assessment Appraisals. So we were able to help Pfizer with their submission for one of the sickle cell drugs, which they'd had 2 negative NICE appraisals, and they were rejected in part because of the lack of quality of life data. I think you're ahead in the US of us, I would say, in terms of the FDA pushing more for more quality of life data up front. So the data that we could contribute was really helpful with getting that then to be approved. It's since been withdrawn, unfortunately, for different reasons. But yeah, so it's working in partnerships like that to then make sure it's always free for patients. Yeah, you'll have to, because if you should be able to register your interest on there with the, or did it just say no? Oh, okay. Well, give me your email address, and I'll get the patient support team to. What we can do is set on the microsite. There is a place to register your interest as well. I can get that sorted.
I think it's probably worth us having a chat with the IWMF guys as well, just to make it a bit more. Have a sort of how to do something so that it's a bit more kind of not formalized, but it's more available to even people beyond this room, because obviously I think I know in previous webinars I've spoken and people are very keen. But as to funding as well, any conduct of trials does cost money. So we will, as physicians running trials, separate from the SANIUS provision, we will need to, I'm planning to apply for a grant from the IWMF because they're very keen on translational studies, and it could even be countries. But, I think the first thing we've heard from you guys is you're keen. This sounds good to you. And developing it further is something we can do as a group and as a team. But having your support and your voices to say, look, we'd like to be a part of it, can only help. So, yeah.
Thank you.